of the problem. So as I envision this, and as I've talked to Ashley about it over the past 5 or 6 years I've been up here in the executive branches, let's have a holistic look at what we're doing in South Carolina with the budget. Let's not look at a third of it. Let's look holistically at the entire $21 billion. Let's get the public involved. Let's go ahead and have an assessment of how we raise money, and then let's decide if that's best for the people of South Carolina. You know, if you're in favor of taxpayer savings, and if you're in favor of efficiency, as I think everybody in the General Assembly would be, a critical component to that is public oversight and public input. I think too often we feel like we get up here in Columbia and we get in this bubble and we have the access to the information and we're going to make the decision because we know best. I just don't buy into that model. I buy into the model that we have a wealth of people in South Carolina, businessmen, CEOs, contractors, home builders from all walks of life who have things to say and things we should hear. And we need to open the process up more to get the benefit of their thoughts. And so a very modest 72-hour waiting period when the budget comes out of Senate Finance onto the floor, and then getting it online in an easily digestible way, in a way so that citizens can go ahead and access Medicaid, or they can access transportation, or they can access tax policy, or they can access anything they want. But it can't be this morass of lines so that the citizenry really has no way to make heads or tails of it. So there's two challenges here. Have a waiting period and then putting the information out there in a way so that the public can provide meaningful impact. I commend the Policy Council for doing this Herculean study. I mean, I know what they've had to go through the Comptroller General and to various other state offices to try to piece this together because it's not easy. It's very opaque. And I don't know of the last time something like this has been done where we now have the table set to have a dialogue on how the entire $21 billion in South Carolina is spent. I'm going to take the information and the policies that the Policy Council has outlined here and working with my fellow senators, especially Senator Grooms, who's already, quite frankly, ahead of the curve on this. I mean, look, this isn't a brand new idea with me. Senator Thomas recognizes that we have $7 million out there unaccounted for, and he's trying hard to get his arms around that. And I think it's our job as senators to help him do that. And I think the information that the Policy Council has provided today sets the foundation for that. So those are my comments. Do I need to talk longer, Governor, to the charge come?
I'm following right in behind you.
But I'll go ahead and having said that, ask Governor Sanford to come and step in. And these will be a lot of the things that the governor's been talking about for 6 years. Governor?
Hi. The good news, they grabbed the chart. The bad news, it wasn't the chart I was looking for. And so this really doesn't show it. It's a useless chart. But I at least got to say I held a chart. Although it does show this, which is
that's a good chart.
Which is what's interesting about the one I had was over a much longer time period, and it's remarkably flat. In other words, in terms of it's just an upward, steady, linear growth in government, and it doesn't really involve the seesaws that you see in the operational part of the budget that gets debated each year. I guess I'd say 3 quick things. One, the curse of our state is looking at the pieces rather than the whole. And yet we sink or swim together as South Carolinians based on how well we do as a whole, South Carolina versus other parts around this country and other parts around the globe. And so in essence, the way that our budget is arranged and the way that people can only get a partial snapshot of what's occurring is really a symptom of a larger problem, which is this sort of balkanized South Carolina that Tom and I have talked about, and Ashley and I have talked about, and a lot of folks have talked about for years. In fact, V.O. Keyes, in his seminal book, The Almanac of Southern Politics, wrote in the late 1940s that the distinguishing characteristic of South Carolina government was what he described as localism. And so that notion of one local snapshot, one piece of South Carolina versus another piece of South Carolina is the way that things have been arranged for a long time. And yet if we're going to be competitive in the 21st century, this notion of a whole snapshot, how does one piece fit with the other? Are we in fact duplicating? Do we in fact have 7 of these already in some other part of South Carolina, therefore we don't need an 8th in this other quadrant of our state, is very, very important, ultimately in our ability to compete with other states and with other countries. So I applaud the effort of the South Carolina Policy Council on that front, and I applaud the effort of Tom Davis in running, it sounds like, a point from a legislative standpoint on these ideas. I would secondly say, you know, sunshine is, or sunlight is, the disinfectant of all disinfectants in the political process. And that which you can't see is that which you can't monitor. And that which you can't monitor oftentimes leads to spending that's either outdated but well-intended, or not so well-intended and certainly outdated. And you think about this stimulus bill that we just went through, one of the things that folks were asking in that debate was, could we have a cooling off period? Why the rush? Why the rush to get it through? Couldn't we at least put it online and let Americans look over this bill a little bit with better detail? Ultimately, that effort was rebuffed for the obvious reason, which is, don't want everybody to look at it. I was on a TV show the other night, and somebody said, well, this is all about stimulus. I said, give me a break. If you actually look at the lineups, which I've done, for instance, there's money for consular and ambassadorial services. And I said, how much stimulus is there in spending money on consular output on the opposite side of the globe for us here domestically? So I think that this notion of greater transparency is, again, something I applaud y'all's efforts very, very much for how important it is. This idea of a 72-hour cooling off period, I think, would be incredibly important, because you talk to, in fairness, House or Senate members, oftentimes what they'll tell you is, we weren't on the Ways and Means Committee, we don't even know what all is in it. And to be fair to those members and representing their respective parts of the state, I think it's very, very important. I would finally simply say this. You can call it a fee, or you can call it a tax, you can call it really anything you want, but if government requires you to pay it, it's left pocket versus right pocket. It is the larger question of civil society, a market-based society where you choose to spend your money or you don't choose to spend your money based on the good of that service and how much good it'll do for you or your family. Or it's by government mandate. The two both have legitimate roles in a civilized society, but I think to maximize economic growth in our society, you want to have as much in the world of civil society, free market society, where you get to make the decision, as opposed to a mandated decision from government. And so I think that opening up and looking at these is incredibly important in maximizing the free part of South Carolina government, and therefore the more growing part of South Carolina government. It's also important, I'll give you one example. There are a whole host of fees that have long outlived their usefulness. I asked on the way over here, you guys give me an example. Universal Service Fund was put in place, basically the Depression era program, to help with rural telephones, to help get rural telephones across that country. We've long outlived that. In fact, we're now leapfrogging in terms of technology. People are now going to cell phones and other things. It collects $15 million a year. It's dispensed by the PSC out to these different rural telephones. Bell South even now has legislation, has asked for legislation that would end it because they say we don't even need the money, and we're just not doing that much in the way of rural telephones these days. And yet, you got a program that's been in place for years upon years upon years, has done that which it was supposed to do, but what was it, Ronald Reagan's phrase, the closest thing to eternal life is a government program. Once it's on the books, it doesn't get reviewed. And the only part that's getting reviewed in our budget on an annual basis, as was correctly pointed out by Tom and Ashley just a moment ago, is that $7 million that gets appropriated. The other 14 is not seeing that kind of rigorous debate that I think people would expect when we're talking about their money, and ultimately this is their money. So I'm just here to say I applaud what y'all are doing, what the Policy Council has already done, what the Senator is going to be doing on this front, and let me know how I can help.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate you all coming over and your leadership on this. And again, I would say in closing, we're looking at possibly getting another $3 billion in money from Washington down here. We have got to know how those dollars are being spent. We have got to open up the books and take a comprehensive look at our budget. This is serious stuff. Citizens are worried about the economy. They're worried about where their dollars are going. And we need to have an open conversation about where this money's coming from and whether a lot of it needs to still be spent. So hopefully everyone will come together and do that. We look forward to opening up the doors a little and taking a look ourselves and seeing what's coming down and what's going out. So thank you all for